They said it was going to be open and it was going to be transparent. And now Big Brother is out of the newsroom. Is he really? The Federal Communications Commission dropped its plan to put government monitors in the newsrooms of America.
But the plan may not be dead. As Paul Strand reports, some experts believe it may still come back.
FCC Commissioner Ajit Pai blew the whistle on his own agency, revealing in the Wall Street Journal the FCC would be sending researchers into newsrooms and grilling journalists about their news choices.
How do you decide to cover certain stories? What's your news philosophy? Does your station have a perceived bias? And those are questions I don't think belong in any newsroom, and certainly not when posed by the government.
Supposedly cooperating with these monitors would be voluntary. But when a big agency like the FCC has the power to revoke your broadcast license, that's a lot of pressure to play along and do what your government wants. Attorney Matthew Clark at the American Center for Law and Justice saw the monitoring scheme as a clear danger to the First Amendment.
It protects the American people from having a federal government that would promote its own agenda through the press, forcing the press to cover the stories that it wants it to cover, that it believes that the American people need to know about.
But I certainly found it to be threatening to our First Amendment values.
One thing these monitors would be finding out is if news outlets were covering 8 specific areas government has deemed critical, which Pai thinks would be mighty intimidating.
That was part of the concern, too, that news coverage ultimately could be slanted towards those 8 categories for fear of offending some sort of government monitor.
Pai and Clark both cheered when the FCC backed down in the face of a huge public outcry, like more than 80,000 people signing an ACLJ petition protesting the scheme.
When the American people stand up with one voice and say no, no FCC monitors in the newsrooms of the American people, that really made a huge difference.
Pai rejoiced at this particular promise.
That neither this study nor any future study would involve the government or researchers hired by the government posing questions to media owners, to news directors, or to news reporters about any of these kinds of questions.
But these First Amendment defenders worry this fight may not be permanently over.
It is important to stay vigilant.
I make the analogy to a baseball game. When a baseball game is suspended, that doesn't mean it's canceled. It just means that a play is going to resume at some later time.
Some see it as no coincidence this monitoring plan was coming from the same administration whose IRS was holding up tax-exempt status for Tea Party and conservative groups and grilling them about their motives.
It is just an overarching philosophy of trying to silence the opposition and to control both the media and what is being able to be broadcast or being able to be talked about amongst the American public.
Paul Strand, CBN News, Washington.
We have good authority that this is the game they play. First of all, they bring out some outrageous scheme. There's an uproar against it, and they say, okay, we're canceling it. And then a few months later, when things die down, they bring it back again and slip it through, and people say, oh, yeah, we've heard about that before. That's their game. So this is coming back. It's just a question of in what garb and how soon. Well, Attorney General Eric Holder is also telling about how the game is played. He basically is telling attorney generals across the nation, you don't have to uphold the laws in your own state. What kind of a lawless attorney general is this? Don Jessup has that story.
Pat Holder says you're right. It's up to state attorneys general to decide if they want to enforce their own laws on marriage. Holder's latest statement comes as same-sex marriage headlines are heating up in states across the country. Ephraim Graham has that story.
State attorneys general are elected to defend the laws of their state. But in his latest address to their national association, U.S. Attorney General Eric Holder told them state laws banning gay marriage are unconstitutional in his opinion. And he told them they could make the decision not to defend such laws.
Any decisions at any level not to defend individual laws must be exceedingly rare. They must be reserved only for exceptional, truly exceptional circumstances. And they must never stem merely from policy or political disagreements.
In the weeks before Holder's speech, Democratic attorneys general in Virginia, Pennsylvania, California, Illinois, Oregon, and Nevada have all already decided not to defend same-sex marriage bans against lawsuits filed by gay couples.
And we must endeavor in all of our efforts.
Critics reacted to Holder's move, saying top state law enforcement officials have a duty to stand behind their state laws. And in a CNS News report, A group of black pastors is calling to impeach Eric Holder, saying, quote, President Obama and Attorney General Eric Holder have turned their backs on the values the American people hold dear, values particularly cherished in the black community, values like marriage, which should be strengthened and promoted rather than weakened and undermined. Meanwhile, the battle over marriage rages from state to state week after week. Michigan is the latest state to put marriage on trial. The 2-week case involves a lesbian couple who want to overturn the state's 2004 voter-approved ban on gay marriage. It's a ban that passed by 59% and was upheld by the state Supreme Court.
The state of Michigan's already spoken on this issue. The people, the public has spoken, and God has spoken, and that's what I'm saying.
And in Arizona, gay marriage supporters are pressuring Governor Jan Brewer to veto a bill that protects the religious rights of business owners who don't want to provide services for same-sex couples.
The homosexual community will say you need to be tolerant of our lifestyle, but that tolerance isn't reciprocated towards the religious community.
They need to keep their religious philosophies in their churches.
Ephraim Graham, CBN News.
And Pat, there of course is a lot of interest in what Governor Brewer will ultimately decide.
Well, I really think that they should impeach, the House should impeach Holder. He has already defied the House of Representatives in certain areas. You go back to that fast and furious debacle where we were shipping assault weapons down to the gangs in Mexico. All these things they're doing, and they keep, you know, the IRS targeting Tea Party, the refusal of people like Lois Lerner to testify, pleading the Fifth Amendment and so forth. Eric Holder should be impeached. The House wants to impeach him. They've talked about impeaching him. Of course, that wouldn't be upheld in the Senate, I imagine, because they're Democrat control. But nevertheless, there should be a move of impeachment in the House, and he should resign. But the idea of telling attorneys general you don't have to abide by the laws of your state, except in extraordinary circumstances. Who gave them the authority? These laws have been passed by these are referendum of the majority of the people in the state, upheld by the courts in the state, and he's telling the attorney generals you don't have to enforce those laws? Nonsense. And what we're seeing now more and more is the rights of homosexuals, the practice of homosexuality, sodomy, consensual sodomy, is being raised and elevated above the rights of religious believers. And that is terrible. The fundamental articles in our Constitution, in the Declaration of Independence, is our right of religion. Congress shall pass no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof. This has nothing to do with limiting homosexuals. It has to do with giving religious people the right to practice their religion freely, and that's one of the foundational principles of the First Amendment. John.
Pat, Russian President Vladimir Putin reportedly has ordered an immediate test of troop combat readiness in central and western Russia. The report did not mention Ukraine, which is Russia's neighbor to the west. Months of protest there forced out the former president, who was pro-Russia. That led to the installation of a new interim president until elections can be held. As CBN News reported Monday, Alexander Turchinov is an evangelical Christian and a Baptist pastor who was elected to parliament in 1998. Recently, we spoke with Sergei Rakuba of U.S.-based Russian Ministries. Rakuba has met Turchinov several times, and he told us Ukraine's new president is well known for his integrity and Christian faith.
The evangelical community knows him as a great preacher. The political community knows him as a principled, honest politician. Alexander Turchinov was always known taking a stand against corruption. Definitely, Steve sees this like a divine hand of God. So that person with personal family Christian values can become a top leader, and in a time of turmoil, extremely critical time for the country, he can be trusted with the power and pulling country together.
Rakuba asked the global Christian community to pray for the interim leader for wisdom and courage in the days ahead. Well, Israeli warplanes reportedly attacked a convoy inside Lebanon Monday. Some reports say the convoy was carrying weapons to Hezbollah, including long-range missiles. Here's Chris Mitchell from Jerusalem.
At a press conference with visiting German Chancellor Angela Merkel, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu would not confirm or deny the attack.
Our policy is clear. We will not speak about reports of what we did or didn't do, but we do all that is necessary in order to defend our citizens.
One of Israel's top naval commanders warns that Hezbollah continues to try to acquire strategic weapons in order to influence future battles. One of those targets could be the major oil and gas discoveries off Israel's coast. The Syrian border also continues to be a source of concern for the IDF. Israel's Chief of Staff, General Benny Gantz, announced on Sunday the Army was replacing one division on the border with one specially trained for the new situation. Gantz described the Middle East as explosive and said a storm is brewing underneath the seeming quiet night and day and on every front. He blamed Iran for most of that brewing storm and said there is no front where Iran is not involved, handing out torches to pyromaniacs with munitions and rockets, and is heavily involved itself in the fighting. He added the relative quiet along Israel's borders was misleading and vowed the IDF would be vigilant and prepared. He said when the state dials 911, the Army would answer. Gantz's statements and the reported strike are two more signs of how fragile the current situation is in the Middle East. Chris Mitchell, CBN News, Jerusalem.
Here at home, a Florida restaurant chain is charging customers more to help offset the cost of Obamacare. 10 Gators Dockside Restaurants has 500 full-time employees. The Affordable Care Act requires businesses with more than 50 full-time employees to offer health care benefits. Although the 1% surcharge on customers' checks is the company's solution to comply with the health care law, it still doesn't cover what they'll owe the government for health care.
We're definitely doing it to stay afloat. It's not political in any way. You know, the president may have brought this agenda to the forefront, but it's what's law now, and what's made it law makes it real for us.
The restaurant could pay up to an additional $500,000 a year for employees' health care. Pat?
You know, this is one more example, ladies and gentlemen, of why this socialist agenda doesn't work. These ivory-towered liberals that have no experience in the real world just come up with this monstrosity of a law. And, you know, again, Nancy Pelosi said, we've got to pass it so we can see what's in it. I mean, they don't have a clue. I doubt very seriously if the president ever read that law. It was kind of like a thing they had to do. They had to get in control of the healthcare system, and this is how they're going to do it. They have to get in control of speech. They have to get in control of the IRS. They want government control of everything. That's their game. They want to bring the United States into the same socialist model that you find in Europe. And Europe is in a quandary. They're floundering in economic morass, and the Obama administration wants to bring us there. That's where those guys are, because they think government is the answer. I mean, maybe it's sincere, maybe it's not sincere, but it is sincerely wrong. John?
Pat, the obesity rate among young children dropped sharply in the last decade, according to a study from the Centers for Disease Control. 10 years ago, 14% of children from ages 2 to 5 were obese. Now it's down to 8%. That's a decline of 43%. But the drop-off was seen in only preschool-age kids, not in older children. Experts caution that it's hard to know if this is a permanent trend, but still they say it's enough of a decline to be optimistic. Pat, trend or not, that's pretty good news.
They're obviously watching this program and they've listened to me. I'm saving a whole generation of kids. Seriously, ladies and gentlemen, if you've got a little kid, he eats what you tell him to eat. He can't go to the grocery store. He can't buy snack food. He can't go to a vending machine. He's your child. And if you start feeding him vegetables and fruits and things like that that are good for him, he will or she will grow up wanting them. They'll have a taste for that. And by the way, you don't have to sweeten cereal. You don't have to make it taste good to you. Children have a highly developed sense of taste. So we don't have to sweeten everything. You don't have to buy them sugar pops. So you can give them bland tasting cereal and it'll be okay because their taste bud, they've got enough to make them taste sweet.
Every time I'm at my sister's house and she has like Fruit Loops and all those sugary cereals, and I try them because I'm eating with my niece and nephew, and it's like, oh my gosh, this is pure sugar. It's pure
It's
sugar.
amazing they don't see it because it's childhood diabetes, type 2 diabetes is an epidemic, and this is why.
Yeah.
If you tell your sister, she said, don't preach to me as my kids.
Well, she's making changes. She's making some healthy changes. So if you're watching, Jeannie, I know you're doing better.
I see little children, you know, Gordon's kids, when they were little, they love vegetables. They love vegetables. They love fruit. I mean, they really like fruit. I mean, you know, his son, Patrick, would eat you out of house and home as far as frozen strawberries and things like that. They loved them. They didn't eat all this other, but I mean, it's just, you know.
You got to train them, though. Got to train them up in the way they should go.
When they get older, keep them away from Starbucks.
Yes, sir.
Including Aunt Wendy.
Yes.
Pastor Rick Warren of Saddleback Church is taking on a new mental health ministry inspired by his own personal tragedy. Warren's son Matthew committed suicide last April. He had struggled with severe depression for years. Now, Pastor Warren is teaming up with the Roman Catholic Diocese of Orange, California, and the National Alliance on Mental Illness to host a day-long event next month. Warren says the conference will address a range of mental health issues, from bipolar disorder to suicide, to more easily hidden issues such as anxiety, eating disorders, and addiction. Well, doctors in California are investigating a mysterious polio-like illness affecting a small number of children. It's known to cause severe weakness or rapid paralysis in one or more limbs. The disease looks like polio, but isn't. Most of the children affected so far have not recovered the use of their arms or legs. Doctors aren't sure if it's a virus or something else. So far, the disease isn't an epidemic, just a rare phenomenon. There have been 20 reported cases in the state. Well, you can always get the latest from CBN News by going to our website at cbnnews.com.